if you're like me, you live life, and there are truths and understandings that you know, but you forget, or you get complacent. And I think when we look at the Christian walk, too often our Christian walk is a walk that is not on level ground. It seems we're either going uphill in struggle, or in a few occasions we're going downhill with a nice backwind to us. But too often it's the uphill parts that give us trouble, that give us the struggles that we face in life. And the message today is to tell Peter also. And I'll tell you, if you're like me, and I suspect you are, if I ask you if you've ever messed up, there's not very many of you that can say, well, no, I haven't. In fact, it may not have been that long since your last mess up. And the truth is, we've all messed up. And when you do mess up, and you sit there and you look at it and you go, wow, did I just mess up? It's hard sometimes because, to be honest with you, I have this tendency to dwell on that mess up. The mistakes that I make, I dwell on. It amazes me how I can sometimes wake up from a dream remembering something that happened in school some 50 years ago, and it bothers me. And I'm thinking, I have to be the only person in the world that remembers that incident. But it's there, reminding me that I messed up. And you know, with Peter, this is a man who knows what it is to mess up. In fact, Peter bragged that he would gladly die for Jesus. In the garden before his arrest, Peter grabbed a sword and was ready to go to war. But within a few hours, Peter not only denied Christ 3 times, but he literally stood by and watched. Peter messed up. And I'll be honest with you, I understand the way he felt more than I wish I did. Too many times I've lived my life looking back and going, wow, if only, what if? Those are words that will drive you crazy because you drive yourself pointlessly trying to change a past that is not going to change. And our verses today start out in Mark 16, verses 1 through 7. And this is Easter Sunday. And it says, when the Sabbath was passed, Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, Salome, brought spices that they might go and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was very large. At entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where you laid him? But go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. I love what Mark decided to do there. Peter was one of the disciples. It is redundant to mention him by name, but I also believe it's not an accident that he decided to mention Peter by name. You see, by Easter Sunday, Peter, being one of the disciples, may have been in doubt in Peter's mind. He may have looked at himself and said, when the Lord needed me the most, I failed him. I rejected my God, and now, therefore, he has rejected me. Peter probably, on that Easter morning, was at the lowest point of his life. And you know what? I have to admit, there's been days of my life where I felt that same hopelessness. I have been in a situation where I could have done things for God and I didn't. So I can relate to it. And the trouble is, the more you dwell on the failure, the more you understand just how flawed you are. What Peter was feeling that Easter morning is the same feeling Adam and Eve felt in the garden. It's the same feeling you and I have felt when we have denied Christ at some point in our life. And you know what? That's your life. You are either preparing to have a mess or you're getting out of a mess. That's the human experience. And I guess, if I'm honest, that's a pretty depressing thought. But I think it's important, even in that depression, of accepting and understanding that I mess up. And so do you, and so did Peter. That our God has not given up on us. From a human understanding, we could understand God saying, that's it, Peter, you failed. I gave you a test and you blew it. You're out. You're done. By human judgment, that would have been reasonable and understandable. If that went before a jury, the jury would certainly agree. Peter failed. And to be honest with you, that same jury would convict me, and that same jury would convict you. We have failed. When Peter bragged how he would die with Jesus, he instead cowered in the back, even fearful, lying to a servant girl. It is sad because Peter was one of the first disciples to call Jesus the Messiah. It was revealed to him, and Peter was given high praise by Jesus for having that understanding and insight. Peter went from that top of that hill experience to the bottom of that valley pretty quickly. In fact, it's only about 2 verses away when Jesus explains that he was going to have to die that Peter says, oh no, that ain't going to happen. And Jesus had to confront him and say, get behind me, Satan. You know, Peter knew what it was like to be on top, and he understood what it's like to be on the bottom. And I have a certain affinity towards Peter because I think him and I are a lot alike. We're both big guys. We're both prone to just charge forward with our emotion, sometimes without thinking. And so I love Peter because he does kind of remind me of myself. But I hate Peter because he sort of reminds me of myself. And the truth of it is, the good Peter had was good, but the bad was bad. And I think at some point, Peter had to come to a point where he understood his own failings. He had to understand God's ideology. I will tell you, Peter, throughout Jesus' time on this earth, very rarely showed any doubt for Jesus. But Peter also, throughout the entire time he served Jesus while Jesus was here, served Jesus in his own strength. You know, it's amazing when you watch people in their strengths. I see people who are gifted singers, and I always envy them. But it's a beautiful thing to hear what God has done with their voices. It's a wonderful thing to have pianists that can play the piano and make beautiful music come from an instrument that all I would know is make terrible noise. God has gifted them and given them abilities. But sometimes you can get too confident in those gifts and abilities. And Peter certainly did. What Peter needed and what Peter got in the crucifixion of Jesus was a reality check. Peter was ready to go to war with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He picked up a sword and he was going to fight. And Jesus said, no, that's not the way we're going. And it suddenly shattered Peter's complete vision and view of what was going to happen. But it also shattered Peter's self-confidence. Because suddenly, Peter had understood the plan wrong. Suddenly he realized that God had a different direction. And what Peter needed to learn was what you and I need to learn. is that when we serve Christ, we do not do it in our own strength. We don't do it with our own abilities. In fact, what we do is we serve Christ through what he gifts us to do. Peter had always been very self-confident. And if I'm honest, I've always been a pretty self-confident guy too. I've always trusted in my own strength, my own abilities, and I will tell you right now that there's nothing more humbling to watch your strength and your abilities disappear. And again, when I tell you that we've all messed up, I suspect most of you have experienced that in your life, where you've had times where you went, I could do this so well, and now I can't. This used to be my gifted area, and now I can't. And I think when it comes to that point, there's a part of us that just gives up. There's a part of us that just says, oh no, now what? And I think, especially for Peter, to hear that Jesus had risen on that morning, there was a part of Peter that went, you know, even if he has risen from the dead, could he forgive me for what I just did? He told me I was going to reject him. And I said, oh no, Lord, not me. And then I did. Peter had to say to himself, what I was failed. I completely messed up. I was completely wrong. And I'm here to tell you, that is true of every one of us. Satan will taunt you and tempt you to fail. Every one of us knows what it is to be tempted by Satan. And it is amazing to me that when Satan is tempting you, he will go, you know, what I'm trying to get you to do isn't all that bad. In fact, in some ways, it's a good thing. Look at Jesus' temptation in the desert. Satan took him to the high part of the temple and says, jump off. People will believe in you then. If you jump off this building and don't get harmed, they'll know you're the Son of God. You know, there's logic in that. There's no question that would make people question it. Jesus' response was to quote Scripture, you're not to put the Lord your God to test. Satan will tempt you to fail. Satan will taunt you to fail. And when you succumb, as soon as you succumb, he will then bring the guilt and go, how could you be so terrible? How could God love somebody as terrible as you? You knew this was wrong. You knew, even though I just spent hours and weeks and days tempting you to do it, you knew it was wrong, and now you've done it. That's where Peter was on that Easter Sunday. He knew he had done wrong. And I've been there myself, and I'm here to tell you, the more you listen to Satan, you will not improve your situation. You need to listen to God. Our second scripture is in Lamentations. I can't even talk straight. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 19 through 24. And this is a good Old Testament promise that is still valid today in 2022. It says, remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. Lamentations tells you what it feels like to have messed up. The afflictions, the wanderings, the wormwood and the gall are all perfect examples of what it feels like when I mess up. I know those feelings and I know those illustrations because I felt them in my life. And so have you. But Lamentations does not leave us there. It says the love of God is everlasting. It is continual. We must understand that there is a God who loves us regardless. Now, you live in a world where if I do something wrong to you, you may love me before, but when I do wrong to you, you're going to go, wait a minute, not anymore. I don't trust you anymore. And perhaps rightfully so. Our human understanding is when you fail me, I cease to put trust in you. I cease to have faith in you. That's the human understanding. And when we do that with God, our humanness suggests to us that no, God can no longer trust us. He can no longer love us. But what the Bible tells me is, and illustrates through many, many, many people, Peter being one of them, that my God does still love me. That He will take me out of the mess that I've made, and He will lift me above it. You know, it's amazing to me how Peter walked with Jesus for those 3 years, listened to Him teach, listened to Him tell them everything they needed to know, and yet somehow didn't quite get it. And I would be more critical of Peter and the disciples, except that I have every word that they have. And you know what? I do it too. I still maintain. Matthew 18, 21 through 22, Peter comes to God saying, you know, how often should I forgive? And Peter came up and said to Him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And Jesus said to him, I did not say 7 times, but 77 times. If Peter would have remembered those words on that Easter morning, he might have had a grasp of just what he knew all along, is that Jesus loved him. He might not be building himself up with guilt, but would be remorsefully asking for forgiveness. And I will tell you that when you and I are confronted with our failures, with our messes, we too need to remember what Jesus said. You know, there are times where in human relationships, you have to sever relationships. If someone does harm to you so many times, I will tell you it's probably time to sever that relationship. And that's not only human wisdom, it's just good wisdom. But a God who says, even though you have suffered me wrong, as Peter did in denying Him, I still love you. That is a love that beyond your comprehension, it's beyond my comprehension. How a God can allow us to continually mess up and still love us enough to say, please come back to me. You see this in the story of the prodigal son. You see this in the story of the lost sheep. Jesus Christ continually says, I am reaching out. I want to heal you. I want to forgive you. Please come back to me. And I will tell you this. At the same time Jesus is saying that, Satan is telling you, you blew it. You messed up. You did a terrible thing. And that separates you from God. And I'm here to tell you something. That part of what Satan is telling you is not entirely wrong. Your sin does and will separate you from God. There is no ifs about that. There are no buts. There are no caveats. Sin separates me from God. However, God, through Jesus Christ, created the bridge for me to be reunited with Him. Even though my sin and my mess messed me up, what Satan does not tell you is if you go back to that God of love and ask for forgiveness, He will in fact forgive. Peter probably decided at that point in his life that he no longer deserved to be a disciple. And yet, if you read Acts, Peter was one of the major players of the first century church. The Roman Catholic Church considered him the first pope. Peter went from a total failure to a rather strong powerhouse for Jesus Christ. When we look at our failures, we too often want to get and say, you know what? God can't use somebody like me. Man, I've just blown it way too many times. And you know, there's something about that that isn't wrong. But what it is not taking into consideration is that we have a loving God who can take brokenness and make wholeness. I've told this story before, but I want to tell it again because it's an important story that speaks to this truth. One of the workers at Wings of Refuge went in one day to work at the house, and she was having trouble. She was struggling with somebody that had done something wrong to her, and she couldn't forgive him. What they had done was terrible. But she felt as a Christian that she should forgive him. But there's this tension in there that says, no, I can't do it. She walked in the house, and one of the participants came up to her and says, you know, you need to help me today. And the staff says, okay, what are we going to do? She goes, I've been praying, and I believe God wants me to forgive my pimp. And I don't know how. How do I forgive a man that did what he did to me? Well, this girl and that participant spent the rest of the day talking and praying and crying. And at the end of the day, both of those women had forgiven. And I love that story because what it tells me is that only God can take two completely broken people and bring healing together out of both. God did not use a strong person. He did not use a healed person. He took two broken people and brought them together in himself and let them experience his love and his forgiveness. And by doing so, they were healed and they were able to forgive. Peter was a broken man that Easter morning, and I suspect that he was probably as low as he's ever been. And I will tell you, I have too been that way too long. But God was not going to allow Peter to remain in that state too long. When the angel said, go and tell the disciples, and Peter also, what that angel was saying is, Peter, you are not too far gone. You are not beyond my redemption. You are not beyond my forgiveness. Peter needed to hear that more that day than ever before. At a point in his life where he was certain that God could never accept him again, he was needing to hear, I still love you. Peter needed that. I needed that. And I think you need that. Make no mistake, God's love is bigger than any mistake you're capable of making. And even when Satan tries to convince you otherwise, and he will, believe me, when you mess up, Satan will be right there taunting you and saying, yeah, look at what you just did. God could never forgive that. But, my friends, do not listen to Satan. If you're feeling a little bit like Peter, cheer up, because God hasn't given up on you. He is calling you by name and reminding you that his death and resurrection was for you. There is, in fact, a life free of the guilt. There's a humorous story about a couple of twin brothers who went to a summer day camp. And at the end of the day, they were having a gathering at the hall, and they were showing a slide presentation. And one of the people saw the kid in a picture and says, hey, that's you. And the boy says, no, that's not me, that's the other me. What he was meaning was, it's my twin brother. My friends, what I will suggest to you is that Satan is telling you, you are a failure, you are a mess maker, you are a loser. And what you need to tell Satan is, no, that's the other me. The me that Jesus Christ died for is forgiven. Can rise up and look God in the eye and say, my God, how much have you loved me? You know what? When you look at all the messes you're going to make, all the messes you have been made, we can finally come to a point where we can embrace the fact that we're human and fallible. We can acknowledge that, yes, there are going to be days I fail, but my God still loves me. My God still calls me by name, and he still is willing to forgive me if I'm willing to come to him. Jesus Christ is calling you by name, just as he did Peter 2,000 years ago. We need to embrace that forgiveness and be thankful for it. Thank you.